She walked into the room wearing a plain blue shirt, jeans, and a quiet smile. Nothing about her screamed astronaut. In fact, most of the other candidates didn't even glance twice at her. They had Ivy League degrees, military badges, and years of technical training under their belts. She, just a school teacher from a small town with a love for the stars and a heart full of determination. From the moment she sat down, the whispers began. Some laughed quietly, others outright questioned how someone like her even made it past the first round. The mocking wasn't hidden. It came in smirks, sideways glances, and patronizing comments like, "Are you here to observe or actually apply?" But what no one saw coming was what she was truly made of. This wasn't just another woman with big dreams and no direction. This was someone who had spent years studying the night sky, building her own rocket prototypes with recycled parts, and teaching children not just science, but hope. She had failed more times than most of the room had ever tried, but she kept coming back. She didn't wear a badge, but she carried something deeper grit. NASA's astronaut selection process is brutal. It's designed to test the mind, body, and soul. And while others boasted physical strength or high IQs, she brought something rare: quiet resilience, sharp instincts, and a way of thinking that caught even the top engineers off guard. Still, the judgment didn't stop. Even when she passed tests with flying colors, they treated it like a fluke until one final test changed everything. What happened next made headlines, silenced critics, and forced even the highest ranks at NASA to take a step back and look at her with a new kind of respect. This is the story of how a simple woman, mocked, doubted, and dismissed, rose so high, even NASA had to bow down. And it all began with one unexpected move. Her name was Amina Khan. Born in a dusty corner of a quiet village, her first view of the night sky came through a cracked window above her bed. She didn't have fancy telescopes or space camp dreams like kids in the cities, but what she did have was curiosity. Endless, unstoppable curiosity. While other children played Amina, read old science books her father picked up from a second-hand stall. She would stare at the stars, drawing diagrams in her notebook, wondering how it all worked, how rockets flew, how planets moved, and how people managed to leave Earth. As she grew older, life didn't get easier. Her mother passed away when she was just 16. Her father, a mechanic, worked double shifts to keep her in school. Amina studied by candlelight, walking miles to use the local library's broken computers. She didn't have access to elite education, but what she lacked in resources, she made up for with passion. Every time someone told her to be realistic, she only dug deeper. And when the astronaut selection process was finally open to civilians with science backgrounds, she took the leap inside the NASA training facility. Her presence didn't sit well with many. She didn't fit the mold. Some instructors ignored her questions. Others gave her impossible challenges, almost hoping she would quit. But she didn't. Each time she was knocked down, she came back stronger. She memorized complex calculations, trained until her muscles ached, and solved simulations that even experienced candidates struggled with. Still, the doubts followed her like a shadow. One senior candidate even joked, "Let's see how far fairy tales go in zero gravity." They didn't know that Amina had spent years preparing for this exact moment. But the real challenge was still a head-on test that would either end everything or change the game forever. The final round of testing was unlike anything Amina had faced before. It wasn't just about brains or stamina, it was about leadership under pressure. NASA had designed a high-stakes simulation meant to mirror a real space emergency. Candidates were dropped into a mock spacecraft failure, with systems crashing, oxygen levels falling, and communication cut off. Every move was monitored. One wrong decision, and it was over. The team Amina was placed in didn't hide their discomfort. She was assigned as a support member, not the lead, a silent message, as if to say she wasn't ready. The lead, Captain Reynolds, had experience and confidence, but he lacked flexibility. As the simulation escalated, wires sparked, alarms blared, and panic started to seep in. Reynolds barked orders, but solutions kept failing. That's when Amina noticed an overlooked fault in the backup fuel system. She pointed it out, calmly, but was brushed off. "Stay in your lane," he muttered. Outside the simulation room, senior NASA officials watched everything. A few already questioned why Amina had gotten this far. Some viewed her as a symbol, not a serious contender. One engineer whispered, "She's just here for the diversity card." Another frowned, watching closely. But what if she's right? Inside, things got worse. The team was losing oxygen fast. Reynolds insisted on sticking to the manual. But Amina, with her mechanic father's instincts and self-taught engineering hacks, knew the system wasn't going to respond the standard way. She had seconds to act. But stepping up now would mean disobeying direct orders and risking automatic disqualification. Her hands hovered over the control panel, her mind racing. Was she willing to sacrifice everything she had worked for just to follow her gut? Meanwhile, in another room, a senior NASA psychologist watched her vitals spike. "She's about to break protocol," he whispered, "or save the mission." Amina's fingers trembled slightly as the simulation countdown flashed red across. The cabin. 8 minutes of simulated oxygen left. Captain Reynolds shouted again, flipping switches that weren't responding. The rest of the team looked at each other, doubt creeping in behind their helmets. Sweat dripped down Amina's neck, but her mind was focused. The pressure inside the chamber was simulated, but the stakes were painfully real. Not just for passing the test, but for everything she represented. She had studied this exact system on her own time. Late nights scrolling through outdated manuals and training videos. The problem wasn't in the main supply, was in the auto-override, stuck in a feedback loop. A small reroute could fix it. But only if someone bypassed the safety protocol manually, something no one else dared to try. Her voice was firm, but calm. "We need to reroute through the auxiliary node and reset the fuel line control." Reynolds turned sharply. "We don't need your guesses. We're following procedure." But the team was starting to shift. One member, a younger engineer named Lopez, glanced between Reynolds and Amina. "What if she's right?" he asked quietly. "We've tried everything else." Reynolds glared. "I'm in charge here." Outside the simulation chamber, silence filled the control room. Supervisors leaned forward, eyes glued to the screens, heart rates rising. Amina's name was suddenly on everyone's lips, not as a novelty, but as a real factor. The lead systems engineer whispered to the program, "Director, if she does this and fails, she'll never be trusted again. But if she's right..." Inside, Amina took one breath and reached for the override switch. The red lights flashed faster. This wasn't just about passing a test. This was about proving that knowledge doesn't come in one shape, one background, or one kind of voice. She pressed down, and everything went silent. The silence that followed Amina's override was deafening. For a second, it felt like time froze. Then, suddenly, systems flickered back to life. Monitors lit up, oxygen levels stabilized, and the emergency alarms died down. The crew inside the simulation chamber looked around in disbelief. Even Reynolds stared at the panels, unable to speak. Amina had done what none of them could. She saved the mission. But just as the room began to exhale in relief, another alert blasted across the screen. A warning none of them expected. Critical systems breach an identified override source. The lights dimmed, and the simulation's emergency protocols locked the crew inside. What Amina didn't know was that her manual override had triggered a secondary failsafe buried deep in the system code. Something even NASA hadn't fully accounted for. Back in the observation room, panic broke out. Engineers scrambled, trying to isolate the new threat. "Oh, this shouldn't be possible," one of them said. "The simulation is behaving like a live spacecraft under cyber attack." The words sent a chill through the control center. Had someone tampered with the system? Was it a glitch or something more deliberate? Inside the chamber, Amina realized the simulation was no longer following script. The emergency felt too real. Gravity was shifting inconsistently, temperature controls were failing, and internal messages stopped responding. Her heart pounded. She looked around at her teammates, their confidence now fully shaken. Even Reynolds wasn't giving orders anymore. He was staring at her, waiting. Somewhere behind the walls of the training center, a security team rushed toward the server room. NASA's top officials were already being called. If this wasn't just a test malfunction, then someone had used the simulation to make a point, or worse, to sabotage the program. And in the middle of it all stood Amina, the so-called outsider. Now the only one who might understand what was really happening, but with systems crashing again and trust wearing thin. The question wasn't just whether she could fix it, it was whether anyone would let her try. Inside the simulation chamber, the temperature was rising fast. The system had gone rogue. Lights flickered again, and now even the floor beneath them began to hum. It felt real too real. Amina's eyes darted to the panels. Something wasn't right. This wasn't a test anymore. It was as if someone had hijacked the simulation.